Hello, my dear students. Today we are going to be talking about the economy in antebellum America. Do you remember what antebellum means? I sure hope so. The prefix ante means before, and bellum means war. So this is talking about America right before the Civil War. We're going to talk about sectional economics, so looking at that divide and what's happening between the North and the South. Remember we talked a little bit about sectionalism in the 1990s with the rap wars, East to West. Well, this is that split pre-Civil War where the North and the South are developing totally different types of economies, and because of that, their society is pretty different. Let's begin. Before we actually get started, I want to tell you, if you see a red bar across the top of the page where I'm moving the mouse, that means don't take notes on this, just listen. So if I forget to say it, look for the red bar. That means no notes, please, just listen. What is a tariff? We need to start by talking about tariffs because they are so important and a little bit complicated. A tariff is a tax, and it's a tax on something that is imported. Basically, think of a tariff as giving the money that comes from shipping a good across oceans or across borders to the government, like a tax. And they get to use that money to help build government programs. It's on imported goods, and think about imported goods as anything that has to cross a border to get here. One of your favorite things. I want you to see there's another use for your favorite word. A synonym for tariff is tax and a duty. So duty comes into play in U.S. history many times. Important for you to know, duty is tax. So you guys, if you have traveled internationally, have probably noticed that either when you leave the United States, so your last airport before you fly out of the U.S., or in the airport before you fly into the U.S., you probably have seen signs, duty free. That means you can buy it and you don't have to pay a tax to import it back into the United States or to export it out of the United States. So if something is duty free, it is free of this tariff. A protective tariff was used during antebellum time, and it's a very important tariff to learn, so please take notes carefully. It protects American manufacturers. So when you hear protective, think protects American manufacturers. Because it raises the price of foreign goods to be the same as American goods. And that means it's going to encourage suppliers to buy the American product instead of the foreign one. Here's a simple example for you. You don't need to take notes on this. See the red bar? I just need you to visualize it. If you feel like you're having a lot of trouble understanding tariffs and you want to write down this example, that's fine, but you don't have to. Let's say there's a company making tires in the United States. It costs them a good bit of money. And when they sell those tires in U.S. stores, of course they want to make a profit, so they sell them for a lot of money. But in China, tires are made very cheaply. And stores that sell the Chinese tires can also sell them cheaply because they didn't have to pay as much for those tires. Well, now, if you were a business and you wanted to sell tires, gee, where would you get your tires? From China or from the U.S.? It's not a hard choice. You would buy the cheap tires that you can sell cheaply because customers would buy what's cheaper, and it would save you money, the supplier. So yes, China wins in this one. Now let's continue our thinking. The U.S. government wants American tires to be bought and sold. So we don't want to give China that extra money, that business. We want it to go to American companies, American manufacturers, American businesses. What can the government do to stop these Chinese tires from being imported? Ha ha ha, you have thought of it. Yes, a protective tariff. So if the US government puts a protective tariff on the Chinese tires, suddenly those tires come up in price, and American tires are now on an equal playing field with the Chinese tires. That means companies will be more likely to buy an American tire than they would have been previously before that protective tariff was on the tires. So businesses who want to sell Chinese tires will have to pay the US government a tariff, that tax or duty, for bringing those tires into the United States. The US tires become more popular because now they're less expensive than the Chinese tires. And why did we need to establish that protective tariff in antebellum America? That's what we're talking about. Because prices of American goods were raised because of the War of 1812, the embargo of 1807 during Jefferson's presidency, and other embargoes after that. So prices of American goods are more expensive than goods made in other countries. And when you have no market to sell to, when there are embargoes, you can't sell overseas, they're expensive to sell to Americans, you're not selling as much. And that leaves a surplus of goods in your storehouses that you'd like to sell, but you can't. Nobody wants to buy. When you have more supply, you're holding more and more of your product in your storehouses, and less demand, nobody's wanting it, that means you have to raise the price so that the few people that do want it can help offset the fact that you're losing money. Well, that's not something anybody wants. So think about it. The government had to raise the price of foreign goods so that people would buy those American goods that are sitting around, and they wouldn't buy goods from foreign countries. Who wanted the protective tariff? Think about it for just a minute. Who would want that protective tariff? It would make sure that American manufactured goods were selling. Yep, you're right. American manufacturers who wanted to sell their goods to Americans. And where were most of those manufacturers? In the North. Yep. Who opposed the tariffs and why? So if the northern manufacturers wanted to put the tariffs on so that foreign goods cost more and were less likely to be brought into the United States, well, who didn't like that idea? Southern planters. Here's why. They relied on cheap foreign goods. They didn't want to pay more for less quality. They felt these cheap foreign goods, maybe like how we think of Chinese imported products today, those foreign goods were cheaper. And the South said, we don't want to have to pay more to bring in these cheaply made foreign goods that we're using for our businesses, for our farming. They didn't want the protective tariff on there. They didn't want to have to pay more to get American products. If they had wanted the American products, they would have paid more from the beginning. And so they said, we don't want these tariffs. It's just going to raise the cost of business. Now, at this time, there are two ways that transportation in the North is expanding. You can see the Erie Canal is leading from New York City all the way out into really the Great Lakes, and so we have it moving through the Lake Erie down into the western parts of the country. We also have the National Road, and that is moving from DC out into Ohio and Indiana and further west, and it's continuing to expand. So the Erie Canal and National Road are making transporting goods much easier than they used to be. Think about railroads at the time. I want you to kind of start understanding that railroads are developing. In the 20s and 30s, there's not much, just a few railroads started. By the 1940s, so a little bit closer to Civil War times, there are more railroads, and By the time we get to the Civil War, those railroads are prolific. They are popping up all over the country and expanding all over. All right. Just a little bit of reminder of history that you have learned and you know. So let's just do a little quick review. It'll be quick to write down. What was Robert Fulton's technology? You got it, the steam engine. So he helped improve the steam engine, which led to an improved steamboat. That might have been what you were thinking. And then a shift from hand tools to machinery is called what? If you go from using hand tools, maybe in your home, to machinery in factories like this one pictured in this engraving, that's called Industrial Revolution. Why did the North industrialize? They had plenty of access to water to run steam-powered machinery. If you have steam-powered machinery, you have to have running water, like a river or stream. Now the South had that too, but they were more interested in using their water to irrigate their crops and their fields. What did Frances Lowell operate in Massachusetts? Think about your web quest that you did for me. What is this a picture of? What's she doing here? What do you think? Yes, textile mills. Textiles are any kind of fabric, so you are wearing probably several different kinds of textiles today. What are those organizations called that protect workers, and were they successful? We'll get into these a bit more, but let's remind ourselves what we've learned in the past. Yep, they're called labor unions, and they weren't too successful at first, but eventually they did succeed in limiting the federal workday. So that is why today people have to get paid overtime if they work more than 40 hours a week. So that's why a lot of companies try to make sure that their workers don't work 40 hours in the work week, or else they'll have to pay them extra money. What was the invention that increased the need for slaves? So around this time, a big invention that made it a lot easier to process cotton. Cotton's kind of dirty when you pick it. It has a lot of parts of the plant that cling to it. And this machine cleans the cotton a lot faster than hand picking it does. Yep, the cotton gin. And it made slavery much more needed, because now you can process so much more cotton that you can grow more of it. But growing more of it means more people to care for the fields, and that means more slaves. Just a quick reminder, where did Southerners live? Yep, in those rural farms and plantations. So think back to country lifestyle, not a lot of city life in the South. All right, last 2 minutes, we're going to move quickly. I want you to copy this pyramid. This is really important. At the very bottom, we have slaves, enslaved African Americans. And you know they make up a large group, but above that, you might not be thinking about these poor, rural, white folks. These ones might be working on farms with the African Americans, and they are not ones who are wealthy by any means. Very happy with Andrew Jackson and what he did for the common man. Also happy with Andrew Jackson are the Yemen farmers. These guys are also not rich. They own farms, but it's not a big farm. It's not a plantation with cash crops. And they may have 1 or 2 slaves, but that's it. Then we have the more wealthy, educated professions, lawyers, doctors, and the like. Above that, at the very top, are the planter elite. These guys are the ones that set the tone for society. They set the rules, the standards, and they are sometimes also called aristocrats. So we might hear them called aristocratic elite, planter elite. Think plantation owners and the fancy lifestyles that you've seen pictures of and you've heard about. All right, women and children in slavery. We know their roles were different than other slaves. They were usually in the house. They're domestic. Maids, nannies, cooks, those kinds of roles. All right, talking about slavery is hard. You have to figure out how did slavery continue. And we talked about that a little bit in class, but think about songs and religion and family connections being part of what tied slavery and allowed slaves to cope with it and not fight out. But we do know there were some African American led rebellions like Nat Turner, and there's another guy, Gabe Prosser, who led a really violent massacre, and you can read about that in the extensions folder. Complete your notes, and we're done for today. Thanks!